Hey everybody, welcome to the second episode of CMOTalk. This episode, we've got Michael Brenner, the head of strategy for NewsCred, and here we go. Hey everybody, it's Shelly Kramer, and I'm here with my co-host Daniel Newman. Welcome to the second episode of CMOTalk Live, and today we're excited by our guest. Actually, everyone's always excited by our guest, the brilliant Michael Brenner. Michael is the Director of Strategy for NewsCred. He's done so many amazing things. He's been a role model for me and for Dan and for so many other people in this space. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to you, Daniel, and let you talk with Michael a little bit while I sit here and just, think about how great you two are.
Oh, Shelly, that's so kind of you. And every time you hand it over to me like that, I can just taste just a little bit of sarcasm. But that's sort of what makes this show so much fun.
Exactly.
But yeah, I am really excited about our guest today. I believe when Shelly asked me when we were trying to set up who the guest should be, I suggested Michael Brenner to become one of our first guests, because if you followed what Shelly and I are doing or anything I've done, I really believe the future of marketing is built around building media hubs, building brand media. And this idea really came to me early on, and Michael was one of the most inspirational in me sort of seeing this vision. So I met Michael a few years back when he was with SAP, and I'm going to let him share more of his story. I don't want to tell it all, but just recently Michael actually contributed a chapter in my newest book that I wrote with Hesse Jones called Evolve, Marketing as We Know It is Doomed. And he sort of led the conversation, started out the chapter that we had about making content its own kingdom. So he wrote a chapter called Where's Content Headed? Or What's Ahead for Content? Mm-hmm. And we want to talk about that a little bit today. So Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Dan. Shelly, great to be here.
Michael, before we jump ahead, right? Podcast world's different than the social media world. I think everybody in social media knows who Michael Brenner is. But in the podcast world, it's maybe a little different audience. Can you just tell everyone a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your content journey, maybe, sure, about how you ended up where you are today?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to make a long story short because I'm a little bit older than you, Dan, so it takes us a little longer to introduce ourselves. But
we've done more.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So so I spent 10 years at the Nielsen Company. Real quick resume. 10 years at the Nielsen Company, and started actually in sales, and then moved into marketing, selling essentially customer information and insights to some of the largest and most well-known CPG and retail brands in the world. And it was such a great experience for me to spend the first 10 years of my career there, because I feel like I learned what marketing really is from the best marketers that ever lived, and I've used that inspiration ever since. The first step I took after leaving that world was I wanted to go do the most different thing I could, and so I was the head of marketing for two small companies. One was an information company, the other was a software startup. And when you're a marketing department of one and you have no budget, you quickly learn that you need to do the kinds of marketing that really works. And what I found early on in my career there was that it was really customer stories, and it wasn't customer stories about why they bought our products. It was customer stories about the people that bought our products and the challenges that they faced. So that was a really important lesson I learned, I think, kind of early on. I moved into head of digital marketing for SAP North America, 100% pure demand generation role. And the big insight there that I was fortunate enough to turn a nice sized budget into a relatively well-oiled demand generation machine, and ultimately left that role as the largest budget holder in marketing. The insight that I found was that when you provide content that helps customers, they convert. It really that simply. And so, that was sort of against the grain of conventional wisdom. Like, for example, the VP of retail sales would say, here's a white paper on how awesome we are in the retail space. We have this great POS system. And I couldn't get leads with that. But when we presented white papers on customer experience or customer service or how to drive an amazing retail experience for customers, then I could get leads. And so, I found that if you start from a position of being helpful to your audience, you can actually drive business results and quantify those. So anyway, so I was plucked up into a position where I drove the company's first content strategy at SAP. I'd love to say we were able to implement that globally. That's still kind of a work in progress there, and I've left that to better people than me. But last June I moved on. I went to NewsCred, the leading content marketing platform, really trying to ride this wave that I think is happening, where we're seeing this tremendous shift from outbound promotion, push messaging to essentially content experiences, customer experiences that brands can deliver that attract an audience versus buy it. And so I'm the head of strategy at NewsCred, and really my goal is to help brands navigate that transition in the world that we're seeing today. And so, great opportunity for me to be here today and hopefully share some of the insights I've learned over the course of that long, illustrious career, if you will.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so you told a little bit about your story. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds here because your story was long. The NewsCred venture is new, but a lot of people I don't think really know what NewsCred does, but they are one of the most influential companies in the content marketing space. So that's why you chose to be there. Just give everyone a little snippet of what you guys are kind of doing to help people with content marketing.
Yeah, we're a full service package, if you will. So if a brand comes to us and they say, hey, we get this content marketing thing, we don't have any clue how to do it, can you take us from 0 to 60? Can we get everything that we need from one provider? And that's really what NewsCred is. We offer, the company started really as a licensed content provider, meaning brands could license content from the New York Times and Fast Company and, all these great sort of publisher sources that brands could borrow on the authority from. Then they realized that the software, the package that delivered that content was really the thing that brands were valuing the most. So created this amazing workflow tool with editorial calendaring and a light CMS with social publishing and distribution and measurement, all the things that you need to do as a content marketer or as a brand publisher. And then I was brought on board really to help brands navigate the sort of how do we do it? How do we get there? What team do we build? How much should our budget be? How do we become best in class as a brand publisher? So it's really the content, it's the software, and then now I've added the services component as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so what I'm kind of thinking would be fun is my heart and soul is around how brands can become publishers. Okay? And you sort of talked about that in the turnkey packages. And I think at the enterprise level where there is substantial budget, that's a distinct possibility. I think somewhere in between where that larger budget lies and the ability to buy content from major publishing sources, including software and then including there's a lot of businesses, I'd say, in the small, mid, and even larger space that just aren't there yet. But they all know that they need content that is more storytelling. They need content that is more customer journey aligned than just white papers, and product spec sheets, and even traditional web content about why their business is great. So talk to me a little bit about the rise of brands as media companies and why a brand leadership, not just the CMO, but also the CEOs, thinking about building themselves up as a publisher rather than trying to maybe push that traditional earned media or PR paths that a lot of companies go for when trying to build a brand.
Yeah, and you sort of hit a lot of things there in that question, so I'll try to follow.
The worst question ever.
No, it was a great question. I want to just try to follow the arc that you took. So you started with sort of like, hey, small companies don't have the resources. So let me start there. Start with a company of one, right? We're all our own personal brands, right? We all share content. We're all publishers. I have a Facebook account. Some of us are on Twitter. Most of us are on LinkedIn. We're all publishing information. When we speak, we're communicating. We're all communicators. So, I think it's really important for even the smallest business, entrepreneurs, sole proprietors to really understand that you're already doing this. You're already publishing information. You're already communicating some form of value or unique value proposition to your audience. Content marketing is just a way of doing that that's less promotional and more customer focused. So let me start there. I think that's where you started the question. And then you kind of shifted all the way to, okay, now you're CMOs at big companies and CEOs, and why do you need to care? And the core premise, and I've been talking about this probably for about 7 years, is that fundamentally I believe that marketing is broken. And what I mean by that, when I showed up at SAP, I looked around and I saw, we had like 100 people in the group that I was in. They were all supposed to be driving demand generation, And I looked at the budgets they had. Each one of them had a little bit of budget, and the results that they were achieving didn't represent the investment that the company was making in them or in their sort of lines of business. And when I asked, well, what's going on here? Why do we have 100 people, each with a budget, that have, in some cases, driven zero results for the business? And the answer was they're just doing what they're told, right? So one of my quotes, we just released sort of 29 content marketing quotes to inspire you. And one of my favorite ones that I came up from that inspiration, that I sort of, hopefully I'm the first one to come up with this, is that behind every piece of bad content or behind every piece of bad marketing is an executive who asked for it. And what I mean by that, and sometimes I use more colorful language because sometimes the request isn't so friendly or constructive. But I think, most people are good people with good intentions. And what happens is we fall in love with our business and we want to talk about our business. It's kind of like you can't tell somebody that their baby is ugly. No executive feels that their baby is ugly, right? So they want to talk about it. And, I post pictures of my kids on Facebook for this exact reason. But the bottom line is that the best way to sort of drive business value is to focus on driving value for your customers. It's what sort of founded the company in the first place, to solve some sort of a problem, not because you had some extremely persuasive promotional message. It was because you were solving some customer problem. And then as businesses grow and mature and become multi-billion-dollar companies, we lose our way and we forget that we had a sort of a founding story and a core purpose as a brand. So fundamentally, marketing is broken. The kinds of marketing that we do, which in some cases I think are based on human nature and our natural inclination to talk about ourselves, they just don't work anymore. And as the social media revolution has sort of taken hold, and we as individual consumers have sort of taken control of the content experiences we have in the world, we reject the kind of promotional messages that brands have gotten really good at creating. So, we see the significant amount of budget in marketing driving towards advertising messages that we are all trying to avoid. We tune out completely. So this is why it's important, not just for the CMO, but for the CEO. It's important to understand that when you serve your customers, or when you seek to serve your customers, you serve the business. It's not the other way around.
So a little bit of what you're saying is really brand humanization, which is another topic that some marketers like to play off of. That hasn't been necessarily so much in your repertoire to use those terms, but really what you're saying is tell stories that are authentic, that give a brand a personality that people can get behind and kind of cheer you on as a brand, rather than here's our product, here's why we sell it, here's why our customers love it, which are all relevant things. But if you look at the arc of the content journey, the point in which people care about that is much further along than those awareness stages and those stages by which they become sort of brand affinity, and you're looking at the point where they're almost ready to buy. That's when those little things start to matter a lot more. Mm-hmm. So I want to share a little something with you and then maybe get your take, because I'm sure our audience and some of the CMOs out there and other marketing leaders are dealing with this as they're trying to sell the idea of content marketing. But our company regularly works with clients to do content marketing, and we get a lot of pushback anytime we ask to do content that's not necessarily right on target to a product offering, right? We want to sell something, so they want to write an article or a white paper or do a bunch of blog articles to talk about widget X, and then maybe a little application of it, but please, nothing personal, right? If it gets even a little bit personal, they get super uncomfortable. How have you sort of told this story to either internal clients or external clients as you've come up through the content space to say, hey, we're going to have to get a little bit uncomfortable. We're going to have to start sharing, a selfie or a picture of our kids, proverbially speaking, right? Sure. In order to step outside the mold and start building personal relationships.
Yeah. So, the underlying problem, it's a great question. The underlying problem is that we're so focused on the business, right? So the underlying problem is cultural, and I'll talk about that in a second. Maybe you'll lead me into sort of the chapter in your book that I talked about where content is going, if we have time. But to answer your question, aside from that cultural issue, I think there's a really simple 3-step approach to helping even CEOs understand the problem. And it's really all about the customer journey. So, provocatively, I would start with the question, do you really truly understand the customer journey? right? So the cultural implication there is, are you really customer centric? Which, again, I'll leave that off the table for a second. But the way to answer that question, I think, is by saying, do you really understand the customer journey? Because if your myopic view on the world is when somebody shows up at the shop and they're ready to buy, well, that's just extremely short-sighted. And the brands that focus on the ready-to-buy customer or prospect are losing out on tremendous opportunity. So let me walk you through that step by step. Step number one is people like you and I, like all of us, we have problems. We're trying to solve them. And at some point, we're just trying to simply understand the problem, right? SAP came out in the market with this great big data solution. And what I did was I did some research and I showed there were 1,000 people for looking for like, what is big data? I don't even know what that is. For every one person that were looking to understand the SAP big data solution. So the first insight that I showed the executive team was there are 1,000 people we are ignoring when we don't talk about what big data is. Forget the product for a second. Let's help them understand what this is, right? So what is it? The second question is, how do I do it? How do I become great at this? How do I solve this problem? It's still not a product-specific question yet, right? So there's probably 100 times more people in that stage than there are who are ready to buy. So let's help them understand how to do it. Yes, some of them are going to go to your competitor, but a good portion of them are going to come to you because you've become this trusted source. And then finally, there is a place for promotion. There is a place for product descriptions and product features and benefits and why you're better, and that's at the last stage. So that's the three-step approach. Understand the customers in their journey that are asking that earliest stage, the middle stage, and that late stage question, and make sure that you're set up as an organization, appropriately allocated across the different journey steps.
I think your old company, Nielsen, actually had that. In my former book, The New Roles of Customer Engagement, I wrote a ton about buyer's journey, and it said stage one, is the awareness, affinity, and purchase intent, right?
Yep.
That's Nielsen. And the awareness stage was like the first 70 to, +% of
right.
it. And you're right. I mean, I think about how we do it. And a lot of us as personal brands, which you mentioned, do this extremely well, because I talk all the time about big data, but I'm really not trying to sell a big data solution. So what I'm talking about it is really just kind of heart to heart with whoever will read my content. When brands have a product to sell, though, they feel this obligation to somehow immediately start pushing people back to their solution much too early, which I don't know if you've done any research, but doesn't that almost sort of deject people? It almost makes them feel really put off really early, where you've sort of, you sort of push them out before you ever give them a chance to come in.
Yeah, I have one phrase, and it's kind of like, when God created the universe, he never imagined such evil would be wrought upon us human beings as the autoplay video, right? So when you go to a publisher site and there's an autoplay video, like, is there anything more evil in the world? And when I see that, I hate the brand. I hate them for doing that. I hate the publisher a little bit, but I hate the brand that that's trying to advertise much more. So I don't think I'm alone. I think that younger generations are even more so no longer willing to put up with interruptions that are so intrusive, that are almost like the brand and the publisher saying, I know this is interruptive. I know this is not what you want, but I'm gonna do it anyway. And I think that we're seeing
because that's
audiences.
what we've always done.
Exactly.
That's what we've always done, and it sucks.
Yes. No better way to say it than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was sitting here listening to you, Michael, and I was thinking about an analogy that maybe everyone can get their head around. Nobody goes to the car lot and says, hey, show me everything you got, right? When you're looking for a car, whether it's a brand new car, whether it's a used car, we know, we spend time before we show up because we know that's going to be terrible. And we spend time thinking about, by the way, I'm shopping for a new car, and I know exactly what I'm looking for, okay? And and if I'm thinking about something that's a little different than what I've had before, I'm saying, hey, Michael, you drive this. What do you think? And so I think that what marketers are not thinking about is the savvy end user who knows how to navigate the web. who knows how to look for the information that they need to help them see all the choices out there, to help them to find situations where people are dealing with similar challenges, similar problems, similar budget restrictions, similar nuances. And so we're using the internet to find that information and narrow down our choices. And then we're also doing what makes absolute sense that all of us, so many of us do every day, is that we're asking the people that we trust. We're asking our friends. And so when you're not creating a customer experience that speaks to that, and you know, I know you find it all the time, you're preaching to the same choir. We all say the same things all the time. And it's, you know, I think marketers are so focused on talking that we don't listen, and we don't listen to it's right there. It's like those 1,000 people. They're right there. And the way that you found them was that you listened, you know, and we're just not, as a group of marketers and senior executives, we're not grasping that. And I think that really is how we get to where we need to be. Listen more, talk less.
Yeah, and it's a great point, and it's why I loved the title of Dan's book. I mean, marketing is doomed. You know, I think the reason we have to talk in such language is that there are really, I think this customer-centric approach or customer experience-based approach is really in a precarious position, right? It's just so much easier to listen to the CEO who says, stick our logo on a billboard or on a stadium or on a golfer's hat, right? It's so easy to say yes, sir, and to just get that done than it is to really think, you know, long and hard about how to help our customers. Right. I don't know what's going to help the world to sort of, you know, change. I don't know if we're at the tipping point yet. I think we're close. I feel like I was put on this earth to help push us through that. I think you both feel the same way, and so, you know, I'm happy to help.
Well, a lot of what we talked about in that particular book was about how marketing really does come back to one-to-one, meaning all the technology, all the automation, all the platforms, all the content. If we're not really speaking, if it's not creating conversations much like this one, where if our customers aren't actually having conversations like this, they feel like they're having conversations with this as a byproduct of the marketing that we're creating. I want to go back on something you just said, and then I want to ask you one more question that's going to sort of take us on out of here for this really, really terrific interview. But Shelly, what you said about the asking our friends and savvy web buyers, it's actually interesting because there's two major stats, one from your old company, Nielsen, that said 84% actually will be more likely to listen to a friend than to a brand. Yeah. That was Nielsen's data. And Forrester's data about content marketing actually came out and said 70 to 90% of a purchase is done before the average buyer engages a brand. So your intuition there is spot on with what the data is saying. And what's interesting about kind of taking this to the next level is the data is going to be the ultimate creator, right, of the next personalized buyer's journey. Because we've got all this data, and I love your analogy about people don't know what it is, then they don't know how to use it, and then they don't know why your solution matters. But the one thing brands I think are starting to see is that data is the only way to get back to one-to-one, but we're still blasting people. So as we try to get back to one-to-one, actually kind of going way back to the way marketing was once done, when brands were much smaller, we're trying to do it on a much, much larger scale. So content's going to be the gateway for this. So tell us, where is content heading that one-to-one can realistically be achieved by brands big and small?
Yeah, so it's a complex answer to a complex problem, right? So we've built up, you know, probably, you know, in the modern organization, at least a century of this sort of command and control structure, where it's now, I think, ingrained to, you know, we've built this machine of promotion. You know, Mad Men and advertising and Madison Avenue kind of approaches no longer working, yet it's still the majority of what we do. You know, I always joke around that if you ask most people, I was at the dentist the other day actually, and he was like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I said, "I'm in marketing." And he was like, "Oh, that's just like sales, right?" I was like, "Well, no, it's actually a little different. I started in sales, but," he's like, "Oh, so it's advertising." Like, no, that's not marketing, right? And please don't put that label. I mean, nothing against advertising people. Again, there's an appropriate mix. Unfortunately, it's too much what people think about marketing. It's too much what marketers do. So I think that we have to move through a number of sort of epochs, if you will. I don't know how to use sort of a big word, but the first one I mentioned earlier, customer centricity. When I talk to CMOs, my first request is that they stop thinking about their number one job as being promoting messages, pushing messages, promoting the company. They're not salespeople, right? Marketing, if you go back to the textbooks, is supposed to be a conversation. So I always tell CMOs that their number one job shouldn't be promotion, it should be culture, customer-centric culture. Help your customers and you'll help the business. Now that takes courage and it takes leadership. That's what we need in the modern enterprise. So starts with the culture. The second thing that flows directly from that is organization. So the structures we see today, advertising, branding, demand gen, field sales, whatever they may be, they're broken. They no longer work. They no longer reflect the reality of the world that we live in today. So to your point, Daniel, I see content, technology, and data being maybe loosely defined, the three structural components of the marketing organization of the future. So organization is a big component. Next is budgets, right? So we're going to have to see budgets shift out of this perception that marketing is just promotion and advertising. We're going to have to see budgets shift into content. That might mean we're going to hire people like entertainers, videographers, comedians like my friend Tim Washer at Cisco, if you know him. These are the kind of people that are going to be the marketing rock stars of the future. And then finally, it gets back to your sort of bring this all to a close, is that when we have that structure in place, when we have the culture, the organization, the budget, and the structure, that will allow the data to flow back. And then it's going to become obvious, right? So we would know that in this organization, this fictitious one we just talked about, that banner ads are being ignored by 99.9% of everybody. And they're not driving affinity. In fact, they're causing people to hate our brand, right? So the data and the personalization becomes the answer, not an approach. It's the answer. When we create a piece of helpful content, like, here are 10 other people's blogs you should go read if you want to get educated on big data. You know what? Hey, I just sent all of my audience off to 10 potential competitors. But I became a trusted source of information when I did that. And when I do that, I'm going to be able to see that I reached the right people at the right time, I gained trust and authority, and ultimately, hopefully, purchase consideration. So I think it has to be structural. I think it has to be, the culture, the org, the budgets, and all of those things have to get in place before the data and the personalization can actually occur.
So, you think we can get this done in the next week?
Easy, no problem.
I just outlined an entire book in my head, just from those 4 things. So when I write it and take credit, I will put somewhere in like the 297th page. This entire book was written by Michael Brenner in a second episode of CMOTalk. However, I'm just a rapid content creator, so I wrote it first.
Go for it.
It'll be super small text.
That's awesome.
Actually, come on. I'll give you credit. I really appreciate that. I think your answers are terrific, and I can't wait for our community to have a chance to hear what you had to say, because this is the fight that I think the progressive marketers are fighting. I do think there is a sect of us that are out there that are looking sort of around the corner, that are seeing the convergence of marketing and technology, the convergence of semantics, big data, and the web and digital experience. And we're seeing how it's all kind of coming together, but really heading back to the world where we're having conversations. So you made that comment, we're not in sales. And I agree in the sense that we don't carry a bag, we don't carry the same quota, and our goals of day-to-day operations aren't the same. But to some extent, we are almost the most responsible of any for truly building relationships, truly sitting face-to-face, hand-to-hand with our customers, communities, stakeholders, and building that trust that's going to make not only one-time deals, but lifelong brand evangelists. And you tell that story so well, Michael. So thanks. I would like to say thank you for your contribution to the book. Thanks for joining Shelly and I here on the second episode of CMOTalk. We will continue to follow you on b2bmarketinginsider.com
Thank you.
You can find Michael blogging, and you can find him now on entrepreneur.com, where he joins me in that community. I was really proud to see you there. You're
honored to be there.
Should be there. And for this episode of CMO Talk, we are out of here. Michael, Shelly, thank you very much.